The throne hall of the alien empire was vast and cold. Giant stone pillars rose high into the shadows above, glowing with strange blue fire. At the end of the hall, upon a black throne carved from crystal, sat the alien queen. Her crown was sharp like blades, her eyes burning with cruel pride. Around her stood her guards, tall warriors with armored scales and weapons humming with deadly energy. The hall was silent except for the echoing sound of footsteps. A prisoner was dragged across the floor, chains rattling with every step. It was a human, bloodied but unbroken, his face calm, his eyes steady. He did not look like a warrior compared to the towering aliens, but something in his gaze was different. He looked forward, not down. The queen raised her hand, and the guard stopped. Her voice was smooth but filled with venom. "This creature refused to kneel before me," she declared, her words echoing across the chamber. "Humans are weak, fragile things, yet they dare speak of freedom and defiance." She leaned forward, her sharp crown gleaming under the firelight. "Today, I will remind them of their place." The crowd of alien nobles laughed, their voices like hissing serpents. To them, a human was nothing more than a small animal pretending to be brave. But the human prisoner did not tremble. He stood on his feet, though the chains cut into his skin. He looked at the queen and said softly, "You may break my body, but you will never break humanity." The hall grew quiet. The queen's eyes narrowed, surprised by his courage. Then she laughed, a cold and cruel laugh that rolled across the hall. "Break humanity?" she repeated, her voice mocking. "I will enjoy watching you scream." She waved her hand, and the guards pushed the human down to his knees. They raised their weapons, glowing whips made of energy that could slice through flesh. But the man did not bow his head. He lifted it higher, meeting the queen's gaze. Every alien in the hall expected him to beg, but he did not. The first strike came, the whip lashing across his back. A flash of burning pain ripped through him. The sound echoed, sharp and merciless. The crowd waited for his cry, but the human did not scream. He gritted his teeth and stared forward. The silence that followed was heavier than any cry. The queen tilted her head, studying him with interest. Another strike came, louder, sharper. The human's body shook, but still he did not fall. Instead, he whispered, loud enough for all to hear, "Humanity does not kneel." A ripple passed through the crowd. The aliens shifted uncomfortably. They were used to seeing slaves broken in moments. But this fragile creature would not bend. The guard struck again and again, each lash tearing skin, each lash expected to crush his will. Yet every time he rose higher, every time he repeated the same words, "Humanity does not kneel." The queen leaned back in her throne, her sharp smile fading into something colder. Her amusement turned into irritation. Was this human truly so foolish, or was he something more? The nobles in the hall began to murmur. Some mocked, but some were silent, their eyes fixed on the human. For the first time in many years, the queen noticed hesitation among her own people. The human lifted his head again, his blood staining the floor beneath him. His voice was broken but strong. "You think punishment will silence us," he said, "but every strike only makes us stronger." His words carried into the silence like fire catching dry wood. Even the guards who held him seemed to falter, their hands trembling slightly. The queen rose slowly from her throne. Her crown gleamed in the blue light, her long cloak dragging across the floor. She walked toward the human with measured steps. Her towering figure stood over him, but he still would not lower his eyes. The queen's shadow fell upon him like a mountain. She whispered, her voice filled with ice. "Tell me, human, what gives you this courage?" The prisoner lifted his head and answered, "My people have faced death 1,000 times on 1,000 battlefields. We have been broken, burned, and starved, yet we rise again. It is not strength of the body, it is strength of the spirit. That is why humanity does not kneel." The queen's eyes narrowed. For the first time, A small spark of doubt touched her heart. This was not how the punishment was supposed to go. Instead of fear, there was defiance. Instead of silence, there were words that spread like flames. The guards raised their weapons again, but now the hall was different. The silence was not of cruelty, but of tension. The crowd no longer laughed. They stared at the human, wondering if perhaps they were witnessing something greater than a simple punishment. The queen raised her hand once more. "Enough," she commanded. But deep inside her, she felt a tremor. For the first time, she realized that this fragile creature, this human, might not be so weak after all. And as the bloodied prisoner stood tall, his chains still tight, but his spirit unbroken, a dangerous truth began to take root in the hearts of those who watched. Humanity was not just surviving. Humanity was defying. And defiance was far more dangerous than fear. The chamber was still heavy with silence. The queen had ended the punishment for the moment, but not because she pitied the human. She ended it because his refusal to scream unsettled the hall. Every alien noble felt it, a strange fire in the air, a feeling they could not name. The human knelt in chains, his body trembling, his back torn and bleeding, but his eyes burned with something stronger than pain. He looked not like a victim, but like a soldier. The queen studied him, her cold gaze sharp as a blade. She expected broken submission, but all she saw was iron will. "Bring him closer," she commanded. The guards dragged him across the floor, his chains clattering. He left a trail of blood behind, yet he still held his head high. The crowd whispered in disbelief. How could a fragile human endure such pain without breaking? The queen leaned forward, her voice like venom. "Tell me, human," she said, "do you truly believe you can defy me?" The man lifted his head slowly, his lips cracked but smiling. "I already have," he whispered. The queen's eyes narrowed, her pride pricked by his words. The guard struck him again, the whip cutting deep. But instead of scream, he laughed. It was a weak laugh, broken by pain, yet it echoed louder than any cry. The crowd froze, shocked. He laughed again, his voice raw but steady. "Is this all your empire can do?" he asked. "Strike the weak and call it power." The nobles hissed angrily. Some demanded his execution, but others remained silent, watching. The queen's expression turned colder. She waved her hand, and the guards paused. "You mock me," she said slowly. "You dare spit defiance in my throne." The human smile widened despite the blood on his lips. "I don't mock you," he replied. "I reveal the truth you fear. Humanity does not kneel." The words echoed again, stronger this time. The crowd shifted nervously, some lowering their eyes. The queen felt a flicker of unease. She saw it, the hesitation in her guards, the whispers among her nobles. This human was planting seeds of doubt, seeds that could grow into rebellion. She would crush him, she decided. She would make an example so brutal that no one would dare remember his defiance. "Take him to the pillar," she ordered, her voice sharp. The guards dragged the human toward the center of the hall. There stood a great stone pillar, scarred with marks of past punishments. Chains rattled as they bound him tight against it. The weapons of the guards glowed brighter, ready to tear him apart. But the human raised his head, his voice steady. "You can chain my body, but not my spirit. You can break my bones, but not my people." His words were simple, but they cut deeper than any blade. The queen's fury burned, yet behind it was curiosity. Why did he not surrender? Why did pain not silence him? The first strike hit again. The human's body shook, his skin burned, but he did not cry out. He clenched his fists and lifted his head higher. Another strike followed, and another. Each lash was met not with screams, but with words. "Humanity does not kneel." His voice grew louder with each blow. At first, the nobles laughed bitterly, mocking his defiance. But soon their laughter died, because every word carried strength. Every word sounded like a promise. The hall became heavy with silence. The guards' hands began to falter. The queen saw it, the uncertainty spreading, the defiance of one man shaking the loyalty of hundreds. She rose from her throne, her cloak sweeping across the floor. She approached the pillar, her towering shadow covering the human. "Do you think your words matter?" she hissed. "You are alone." The human lifted his head, his eyes blazing despite the blood running down his face. "I am never alone," he said. "Every human across the stars stands with me, even if you cannot see them. Every strike you give me, they will carry as their own. And when they rise, they will remember this moment." The queen froze, his words striking deeper than she expected. She saw not just a beaten man, but a spark of rebellion, the very thing empires feared most. The guards looked at her, uncertain, waiting for her command. For the first time in centuries, hesitation touched the throne hall. The queen's voice turned sharp again, covering her doubt. "Enough," she snapped. She turned her back, her cloak flowing behind her. "Lock him in the cells," she ordered. "We will continue this tomorrow, and by then, his spirit will be broken." The guards obeyed, dragging the human away. But even as chains rattled and his body bled, his voice carried through the hall, faint but unyielding. "Humanity does not kneel." And those words, whispered through blood, burned themselves into the minds of all who heard. For some, it was madness. For others, it was hope. But for the queen, it was a threat she could not ignore. The dungeons of the alien palace were dark and silent. Chains rattled softly in the shadows. Dripping water echoed through the stone corridors. Inside one of the cold cells, the human sat against the wall, his body torn and bruised. Yet his eyes still burned with the same fire. Even in silence, he seemed unbroken. Guards stood outside the cell, tall and armored, their faces hidden behind masks. They had seen countless prisoners collapse, scream, and beg for mercy. But this one was different. Every strike had only made him louder. Every wound only made him stronger. They whispered among themselves, voices low with unease. "How can he endure so much?" one asked. "Why does he not fear the queen?" another muttered. For the first time, doubt touched the soldiers of the throne. In the grand hall above, the alien queen paced before her throne. Her cloak of shadow dragged across the crystal floor. The nobles bowed their heads, pretending loyalty, but even they could not hide the whispers that grew in their hearts. The humans' defiance had unsettled them. One fragile creature had shown more strength than all their slaves combined, and that strength was dangerous. The queen slammed her hand against the throne, her voice sharp as thunder. "He is nothing," she declared. "He will break like all the others." But her words sounded hollow even to herself, because deep inside, she remembered his gaze, that unyielding fire that no whip could silence. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, the human whispered to himself. Memories of Earth filled his mind. He saw the faces of his people, the history of humanity, wars, hardships, hunger, fire, and yet survival. Humans had always risen from the ashes. And he knew, even here in the heart of the empire, his spirit carried the weight of all who came before. The guards returned at dawn, pulling him from the cell. They dragged him back into the throne hall where the queen waited. Her eyes burned with cold fury. She wanted to crush him before all, to erase the seed of courage he had planted. The hall was full, nobles gathered in silence, their eyes fixed not on the queen, but on the chain man. They expected fear, but once again he stood tall, his voice cracked but clear. "You will never break me," he said, "because I do not stand here alone." A murmur swept through the chamber. The queen's jaw tightened. She raised her hand and ordered the punishment to begin again. The guards struck him, each lash echoing like thunder. But with each strike, the human's voice rose. "Humanity does not kneel." The words rolled across the hall like waves. Some aliens laughed nervously, but others fell silent. The guards themselves began to falter. They had sworn loyalty to the queen, but their hands trembled with each strike. How could one small creature endure such pain without falling? The queen rose from her throne, her patience burning away. She stepped closer, her voice cutting through the silence. "You think you are strong," she hissed. "You think your defiance means anything. She leaned close, her shadow falling over him. You are one man against an empire. The human lifted his head, his eyes blazing. One man can light a fire, he said, and fire spreads. The crowd fell silent, the words hanging in the air like sparks. The queen's face hardened, but her heart trembled, because she saw it now. The fear in her people's eyes was not directed at her. It was directed at the man who would not kneel. Her throne shook not from rebellion, but from belief. Belief in something stronger than fear. The guard struck again, but the man's voice grew louder. His words spread like wildfire, filling every corner of the chamber. Humanity does not kneel. The nobles shifted, some lowering their heads, ashamed. Others clenched their fists, silently inspired. And in that moment, the queen realized the unthinkable. Her punishment had not broken him. It had broken her power. She raised her hand sharply, halting the guards. Her eyes burned with fury, but beneath it lay the crack of doubt. This single prisoner, this fragile human, had shaken the foundations of her throne, and though she still stood above him, she felt the balance of power begin to tilt. The throne hall was silent after the human's last words. The guards had lowered their weapons. The nobles had stopped laughing. Even the alien queen herself stood frozen, her hand lifted but unmoving. She could feel it, the shift in the air, the spark of something dangerous. Defiance was spreading like a shadow, and shadows were harder to fight than armies. The human stood bloodied, his chains digging into his skin, but his eyes shone brighter than ever. He looked not like a broken prisoner, but like a messenger carrying something greater. The queen stepped closer, her voice sharp and low. What makes you so certain, she hissed? What gives you strength when your body is weak, when your life is nothing in my hands? The human lifted his head slowly, his voice soft but steady. You think strength is measured by muscle, by weapons, by the size of your empire. But humanity learned long ago that true strength is something else. It is the will to rise when everything is against you. It is the fire that refuses to die, even in the darkest night. The queen narrowed her eyes, but curiosity stirred in her heart. She wanted to understand, though her pride would never allow her to ask. And as the human spoke, images filled his mind. Flashbacks of history, memories carried deep in his blood. The weight of humanity's struggle rising within him. He saw humans standing in frozen wastelands, their bodies weak, their tools simple, yet they hunted beasts 10 times their size. They worked together, sharing warmth, refusing to let the cold take them. He saw fires burning in caves, small lights against endless darkness. And in those flames, he saw the same fire that burned in him now. He saw humans in battles long forgotten, soldiers outnumbered, facing steel with nothing but courage. Every time they were struck down, another rose to fight. Every defeat became a lesson. Every scar became a memory. He saw cities rise from ashes, stronger than before. He saw humanity bend, but never break. His voice grew stronger as the memories surged. Pain does not destroy us, he said. It teaches us. Fear does not control us. It makes us sharper, and death does not silence us. It gives us reason to fight harder. The crowd listened in silence, their hearts stirring against their will. Even the guards, sworn to obey without thought, lowered their eyes. Because deep down, every creature understood the power of survival, and the human's words carried that truth like a blade. The queen's face darkened, her crown gleaming in the firelight. She wanted to silence him, to crush his spirit beneath her heel. But his words reached even her, striking places in her heart she thought were untouchable. For centuries, she had ruled through fear. Yet fear had never built anything, it had only chained. This human spoke of something different, something far stronger. You think your history matters here, she said bitterly. This is my empire, not your world. The human smiled weakly, blood on his lips. History always matters, he replied, because it is not just mine, it is in me, it is in every human who breathes. And when you strike one of us, you strike all of us. The words echoed like thunder. The nobles shifted in unease, glancing at each other. The queen felt their doubt like a weight pressing down. One man was turning her hall into a battlefield of ideas, and she was losing ground. The human's voice grew louder. You can kill me, but you will never kill what I carry. The secret of humanity is not strength of body, but strength of spirit. We're not the strongest, we're not the fastest, but we endure. We endure the fire, the hunger, the chains, the fear, and when it breaks others, it forges us. The hall trembled with silence. No one dared speak, not even the queen, because in that moment she saw the truth. This fragile creature was not speaking only for himself. He was speaking for all of humanity, past and present, and his spirit was something her empire could never truly conquer. The queen turned sharply, her cloak whipping behind her, her fury clashing with her fear. "Take him away," she commanded, her voice shaking. The guards obeyed, but their hands trembled. They dragged the human back toward the dungeons. Yet his words lingered in the chamber like smoke, refusing to fade. The nobles remained silent, their thoughts dangerous. Because once an empire's subjects began to question power, cracks always formed. And though the queen still sat upon her throne, she felt it, the first crack in her reign. And it had come not from war, but from the defiance of a single human. The dungeon door creaked open once more. Chains clattered as the guards pulled the human back into the throne hall. Days had passed since his first defiance, yet his eyes had not dimmed. His body was weak, bruised, and covered with wounds, but his spirit burned even brighter. The nobles gathered again, filling the chamber with whispers. Some wanted the human destroyed at once. Others remained silent, secretly waiting, curious about what he would do next. The queen sat on her black crystal throne, her sharp crown glowing in the pale firelight. Her eyes were filled with fury, but also something deeper, something like unease. She rose slowly, her voice slicing the air. "Enough games," she declared. "Today this human kneels, or today he dies." Her words echoed through the hall, yet her voice carried a shadow of doubt, because she remembered the silence of her guards, the whispers of her nobles, and most of all, the human's words that refused to fade. The guards forced the man to his knees at the center of the chamber. Chains wrapped around his arms, pressing him down. The queen stood over him, her towering shadow stretching long across the floor. "Kneel willingly," she said coldly. "Beg for mercy, and I will spare your life." The hall waited, breaths held, but instead of bowing his head, the human lifted it higher. A broken smile touched his lips. "You do not understand," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I cannot kneel, because humanity has no word for surrender." The queen's eyes flared, her hand lifted in rage. The guards raised their glowing whips, ready to strike. But before the blow could land, the human laughed. It was a weak laugh, heavy with pain, but it carried like thunder across the chamber. The sound froze the hall, shocking even the guards. The queen's fury boiled. "You dare laugh at me," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "You, a fragile creature, chained and broken, laugh at your queen." The human's gaze locked with hers, fearless. "I do not laugh at you," he replied. "I laugh at the idea that you think chains can hold a human spirit." The nobles gasped, some stepped back. For a moment, the balance of power seemed to shift. The queen's hand trembled, though she tried to hide it. She demanded another strike, but the guards hesitated. They looked at each other, uncertain, their hands heavy with doubt. The human pulled against his chains, blood dripping, his strength almost gone. But something greater than muscle moved him. He pushed himself to his feet, slow but steady. The hall filled with shock. No slave had ever stood after such punishment. Yet here he was, standing tall before the throne. His voice rose, louder than it had ever been. You can wound my flesh, but you cannot touch my will. You can kill me, but you cannot kill the fire I carry. That fire is humanity, and it does not bow to any empire." The words cut through the chamber like blades. Some nobles lowered their heads, ashamed of their silence. Others clenched their fists, secretly stirred by his courage. Even the guards stepped back, their whips falling to their sides. For the first time in living memory, the Queen's command was met not with obedience, but with hesitation. The Queen's fury twisted into fear, though she would never admit it. She saw it clearly now. Her control was slipping. This man had planted something she could not crush. His defiance was no longer just his. It was spreading, growing, infecting the very heart of her empire. She stepped forward, her crown gleaming, her voice shaking with fury. "You are nothing," she spat. "A single man, weak and broken." The human stared back, his voice calm. "One man can be nothing," he said, "but one man's defiance can be everything." The chamber trembled with silence. And in that silence, the Queen felt it, the turning point. Her throne no longer stood on fear alone, because fear was crumbling, replaced by something she had no power over. Hope. The guards stepped back further, uncertain of their place. The nobles whispered, their loyalty cracking, and the human stood tall, his body broken, but his spirit unshaken. He had turned punishment into defiance, defiance into strength, and strength into something the Queen could not control. The Queen sat upon her black crystal throne, but the chamber no longer felt secure. The human's defiance still echoed in the air, his words refusing to fade. The nobles whispered in shadows, the guards avoided her gaze. Fear had once been her strongest weapon, but now it seemed weaker than the fire of one human voice. The man had been thrown back into the dungeons, his body weak and covered with wounds. Yet even in the silence of his cell, his words remained alive. Guards spoke of him in hushed tones, passing the story like a secret flame. Slaves in the kitchens, workers in the mines, even merchants in the city began to whisper his words. Humanity does not kneel. At first it was only whispers, drifting through corridors and dark alleys. But whispers turned into quiet chants, and chants into bold voices. In distant colonies of the empire, slaves began to resist. They did not rise in full rebellion yet, but they stopped bowing as quickly. They looked their masters in the eyes with new courage. The seed of defiance had been planted, and it was already growing. The Queen's advisors warned her, their voices trembling. "The human must be silenced," one said. "His words are dangerous. They spread like disease." But another noble, older and wiser, whispered carefully, "Perhaps it is already too late, Your Majesty, for words cannot be chained." The Queen's fury grew like a storm. She ordered the guards to double the human's punishment. She demanded silence, demanded obedience. Yet no matter how many times the whip struck his back, the human only repeated the same words. Humanity does not kneel. Every repetition was a spark, and the sparks began to spread beyond her control. In the dark mines of a distant planet, alien slaves repeated his words as they lifted stones. In the icy colonies of the Outer Rim, rebels carved his phrase onto walls. In the hidden tunnels of the Empire, resistance leaders spoke his name like a legend. He was no longer a man in chains. He was becoming a symbol. The guards themselves began to falter. Some struck him with hesitation. Others lowered their weapons altogether. A few even whispered his words under their breath when the Queen was not watching. The Empire had ruled for centuries with fear, but now fear was cracking. The fire of defiance was spreading faster than she could control. The Queen gathered her court, her voice sharp and furious. "This must end," she commanded. "If we allow this flame to burn, it will consume everything." But in her heart, she knew the truth. The flame was already burning, and even her throne was not safe from its heat. Meanwhile, in his cell, the human smiled through his pain. He could hear the whispers in the corridors. He knew his words had taken root. Every bruise, every lash, every drop of blood had been transformed into fuel for something greater. He was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for every soul who longed to stand free. The queen entered the dungeon herself one night. Her shadow filled the chamber as she looked down at the chained man. "You are no hero," she hissed. "You are nothing but a weak creature clinging to foolish hope." The human lifted his head, his voice calm and steady. "Maybe I am weak," he said. "Maybe I'm only one man. But even a spark can set a forest on fire." Her eyes narrowed, but for the first time, she did not answer, because she could feel it. The fire he spoke of was already burning. It was in her court, in her soldiers, in her people, and it was slipping from her grasp with every passing hour. The galaxy itself was beginning to change. Rebellion had not yet come, but the sound of it was rising like distant thunder. The queen still ruled, but her empire trembled. And at the center of it all was one human, chained and bleeding, but more powerful than any army, because he had given the people something no empire could ever take away: hope. The throne hall was filled once more, but this time the air was different. The nobles sat in silence. The guards stood uneasy, and even the pillars of crystal seemed to hold their breath. For weeks, the human's defiance had spread like wildfire. His words had traveled from dungeon walls to city streets, from distant colonies to hidden outposts. And now the queen had summoned all to witness the end. The heavy doors opened, chains rattling as the human was dragged inside. His body was weak, his steps unsteady, but his eyes still burned with that same fire. The crowd expected silence from him, but instead he lifted his head. "Humanity does not kneel," he said again, his voice hoarse but strong, and the hall trembled with whispers. The queen rose from her throne, her crown gleaming under the pale flames. Her cloak flowed behind her like a storm. She wanted this to be the moment she crushed him completely. She wanted to remind the galaxy that fear was stronger than hope. But as she looked upon him, chained yet unbroken, something inside her faltered. "Today you will kneel," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "Or today you will die before all who watch." She lifted her hand, and the guards stepped forward, weapons ready. But none of them moved. Their hands trembled, their eyes shifting between the queen and the prisoner. The human's defiance had infected even her soldiers. The queen's anger grew. Her voice thundered through the chamber. "Strike him," she commanded, but the guards froze in place. The silence was heavy, every noble watching, every heart waiting. And then a voice rose from the crowd, soft at first, but clear. "Humanity does not kneel." The queen's eyes widened. Another voice followed, louder, and another, until the chamber was filled with the chant. "Humanity does not kneel." Alien nobles, slaves, even guards whispered it under their breath. The sound grew like a wave, breaking against the throne, and the queen realized with horror that her greatest weapon, fear, was gone. The human stood taller despite his chains. He looked at the queen, his voice steady and calm. "You thought punishment would break me," he said, "but all it did was break your power. You thought my defiance was mine alone, but it belongs to all who refuse your chains." The queen's fury trembled into fear. Her crown felt heavy upon her head, her throne no longer safe. She looked around the hall and saw eyes no longer bowing, no longer trembling. The empire she had built on obedience was crumbling in front of her, not from armies, not from weapons, but from the spirit of one man. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. For the first time in her reign, she felt powerless, because the people no longer listened to her commands. They listened to the human's words, and his words were stronger than any decree. The guards stepped back from the prisoner, their weapons lowered. The nobles avoided her eyes, their loyalty broken. The chant filled the chamber like thunder, shaking the very walls. "Humanity does not kneel." The human lifted his chained hands, blood dripping but spirit blazing. "This is the truth," he said, his voice rising above the chant. "You can rule with fear, but fear fades. You can chain bodies, but not souls. You can break empires, but not the will to rise again. And in that moment, the queen knew she had lost. She turned sharply, her cloak swirling like smoke. But her retreat was not the march of a ruler. It was the step of someone who had been defeated without a single weapon raised. Her crown still shone, her throne still stood. But both were empty, for power without fear is no power at all. The human remained chained, yet he had become something greater. Not a prisoner, not a slave, but a symbol. And symbols cannot be killed. From that day, across the empire, in mines and colonies, in cities and fields, the word spread. Humanity does not kneel. And no matter how many soldiers the queen sent, no matter how many punishments she ordered, the fire only grew brighter. Because in the end, the galaxy learned a truth that could not be unlearned. Humanity was fragile in body, but unbreakable in spirit. And even the queen, once feared across the stars, was forced to bow before that truth.